we both agreed that we'll put our own finances. I mean, I drained our personal savings. I put everything that we had in liquid cash into this business.
Meet Erika, founder and CEO of Drink Dry, the first premium non-alcoholic drinks marketplace in the Middle East and North Africa. Since launching in 2019, she's led the charge in the region's alcohol-free revolution, supplying top resellers and luxury hospitality venues across the UAE and beyond.
I can only imagine how difficult it was for my husband to continue backing me for the first 2 years. We put everything we had in liquid assets to let me do that. So I think you have to weigh that up, and don't leave your day job. Be prepared to put in some extra hours in the evening to start it as a side hustle.
True. Yeah.
Sacrifice the social life first before you start sacrificing everything else that is the core of your own personal life.
Hi, Erika, and welcome to Sheconomy. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So right now, the non-alcoholic lifestyle is more than just a trend, it's booming, with the global non-alcoholic beverages market expected to hit nearly 2.7 trillion by 2034. Back in 2020, when you launched Drink Dry, the shift was only just beginning. How did you know then that this was the right time and the right idea to build a business around it?
Oh my gosh, if I knew the answer to that, I think I'd help so many entrepreneurs, because I do think two of the critical things that really dictated the success for Drink Dry was the right time and the right place. And I think the advantage that I had was we as a family moved to Dubai in 2019. And by the time I launched Drink Dry a year later, just over a year later, I came from the West. So I came from the UK, where non-alc was already a conversation. It was already available in your local pub. You could find some products online. It wasn't mass, so you couldn't find really great quality non-alcoholic drinks in your local supermarket. But those who seeked out could find it. So when I came here and I was talking to people about non-alc drinks, nobody around me knew anything about it. And I felt like, wow, this is actually a superpower that I have this knowledge and this experience of the last maybe 4 years when I stopped drinking alcohol myself, that, I know these products, I know these founders. I connected with them, when they were still making these drinks in their mum's kitchens. And I think it just felt like the right time. And if you look at in general, if you look at different trends, whether that's in food or beverage, or it's changing somewhat in technology, but it was always the Middle East would be 3 to 4 to 5 years behind the trends in the West. So it just felt like the market here was right for the products. And I just remember doing so much research, and every time I wouldn't find anyone or anything doing with non-alc. I would just think, how come nobody's done it? How come I have this idea that seems so perfect for this place at the moment and at this time? And I just felt like, look, I will not be able to forgive myself if I don't try. And if I fail, and if it's too early, if it doesn't work, so be it. But if I don't try and 6 months later somebody else does it, I will kick myself for not doing it.
Yeah. So a little bit more about Drink Dry. So when you started building Drink Dry, what was hardest? Was it convincing suppliers abroad to take the region seriously, or building customer demand at home?
I think in exact same sequence as you said, our business model has changed as we kind of went. And I think when I look back at 2019, when I first came up with the idea of what I wanted to do, and it all came down to investment and how much I was prepared to invest. So my initial idea for Drink Dry was, well, look, I have all these contacts in the suppliers. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to connect them to big distributors here, and I will let them have their own exclusive agreements in order to facilitate my e-commerce business, right? I did not set out to be the exclusive importer and distributor of all these global brands, So I remember Gulf Food 2020 February, I was, just being kind of like a facilitator. I would bring the brands into Gulf Food that flew in from everywhere just before COVID hit. And I would set them up with these different distributors and say, look, you should bring this brand in and you should bring this brand in, purely for the purpose of then I will be able to locally purchase small quantities from you and create this marketplace that Drink Dry store is, and, you know, service the end consumer. Truth to be told, I did not think about the B2B because the investment, the people, it's a completely different business model if you're trying to tap into all of that. And then COVID hit. You know, and all the distributors, all the success we've kind of had, all the verbal, yes, we'll go ahead with it. All the distributors had so much money tied into the market that any new product development, any NPDs was just an absolute no-go. And you have, by this point, you have all these brands quite eagerly, because I sold the idea of the region to them. They're quite eager to enter the market. Their home markets are in lockdown. And they're kind of trying to find new sources of revenue. So export seemed like a genius idea. So they're still super eager. They're still super interested. And I remember it was my husband who said, he's like, why don't you take the exclusive distribution? The brands have nothing to lose because nobody's going to take them on for at least a year. And he said, you know, if you can sign them on for 2 to 3 years, it's a bit of a risk for them, but, you know, you can convince them. And worst case scenario, when COVID is over, because at that point it felt like it's going to linger for longer. It's like when everything is over and if you didn't succeed, if they're not happy with what you've done for them, they'll go and find somebody else, you know. And that was it. And we kind of then, we signed these agreements with these global brands, you know, 5th generation winemaking families. We signed the agreements with them. We took them on. And because of COVID, the hospitality was very slow. We didn't have so much pressure to go into B2B in the first, I would say, 12 to 18 months, which was a blessing in disguise. So we really, really focused on B2C. We focused on, I always had this idea of, instead of trying to convince the hospitality or trying to convince a buyer at the supermarket that, hey, look, the category is growing elsewhere, you should have it on the shelf. I wanted to do it the other way around. I wanted to create the demand first, and I wanted the consumers to start demanding the products in hotels, restaurants. I wanted people to start complaining on social media, why can't I pick up my favorite non-alcoholic beer at Spinney's and Waitrose? And I wanted it to come not from me. So I used my what I call them like my Drink Dry minion tribe. I kind of used my ambassadors to do the work for me. And it worked. And we created this buzz. We worked really, really hard on our social media strategy to create the B2C hype and the tribe of Drink Dry to then start really accumulating the demand in the B2B space.
Well done. So Dubai is a city that loves luxury and trends. How did you position this non-alcoholic offering as something aspirational rather than just an alternative?
Again, I think it was something that was very clear for me from beginning. We were never selling a product. Drink Dry is a brand in its own rights. And this is what we've always focused on building. We build the brands underneath us with the brand's help, but Drink Dry is the overarching brand here. And what I always wanted to make sure that the consumers feel that Drink Dry is not selling them the product. We're not selling a non-alcoholic beer. We're not selling them a non-alcoholic sparkling wine. We're selling them a lifestyle. We're selling them the feeling of conviviality with their friends. That is a positive one. We're selling them great taste. We're selling them great experience. So if you look on our social media, particularly like on Instagram and TikTok, the product is always kind of positioned around us. You know, it's a glass I'm holding or the bottles are there. And it's always the lifestyle. Sometimes it's humorous, sometimes it's luxurious, sometimes it's on the beach because that's what the brand dictates. But it's always the feeling that we sell. And I think with that, you have to position it in a premium space. You know, we're just going through the process of rebranding, which is the right time after 5 years. And the slogan that we have finally agreed on is celebrate every day.
Nice.
And it's, you know, we want it to be premium and celebratory because it isn't a cup of tea, it isn't a glass of water, it is something more than that. But we want people to be able to access it every day. So celebrate every day is what Drink Dry is all about. So it's the lifestyle, it's the feeling, it's not so much the product itself that we sell.
Love it. Thank you. So we're seeing Gen Z drinking 20% less alcohol than millennials at the same age. How are younger generations shaping the future of Drink Dry?
I think we'll see that. We're not seeing that just yet. I think
Right.
if you look at where the spending power is in Dubai, it's still held with the millennials. The education system is phenomenal in Dubai up until higher education, right? And we still see a trend. Like, say, 15 years ago, you would see a lot of expats, the mums moving back with their children at the age of 11 or 13 to go to secondary school. That is no longer the case. But you still see the exodus of younger people at the age of 18 when they finish their A-levels, their IB, to go to universities abroad. So the Gen Z at the moment, in the bracket that they're in, they're not necessarily the customers that we see in the Middle East. I think we always read and follow the trends, what's happening globally, but I always have to ask myself, is this applicable for us yet? And I don't think it is. You know, when I look at our simple kind of like Google Analytics of our website and what I see, the consumer base is literally 50-50. The biggest split we've ever seen is 49 men, 51% women, but it's a really clear 50-50 between female and male. A huge majority of our customers are English language users. Of course, it could be some Arabic region that are using English on their device. But when we look at the age group, it's actually the biggest spenders that we see is 30 to 40 or 35 to 45. So it's the millennials that we're seeing that currently are the biggest consumers. And then you have the 45 to 55. And only then you have the 25 to 35. I think, ask me in 5 years' time, when the current Gen Zs start climbing up the career ladders and acquiring more senior positions in their roles and possibly relocating back to the Middle East, to Dubai, my answer might be different. But I think our consumer base at the moment in the UAE, it's still the millennials that are driving the business for us.
Thank you for that. So moving on to being a business owner in the UAE then. Building a business always brings surprises. What's one thing about launching and running a business here in the UAE that no one warned you about?
One thing, oh my gosh, I think there's just so many. I think in general, I've never had aspirations of being an entrepreneur. I grew up in a family that being a public servant was the aspiration. Stability, pension, good healthcare. You know, both of my parents worked in public sector, and that was the aspiration. So you become a teacher, you become a doctor, you become, a diplomat for your country. You work for the ministry somewhere. This was always the aspiration because you'll have security of a job, you'll get paid, and you'll have a great pension. So when I was growing up, the ambition was always to get into a prestigious kind of public service, and I went to the UK from Lithuania. I studied history and politics. My first job was at the Lithuanian embassy. I was following my plan to a T, you know, and I was a few months away from applying for my diplomatic service exams back in Lithuania. And then I met my husband, who wasn't going to move to Lithuania, who, you know, he had a son from his previous marriage. So he was very much based in the UK. And then my plans changed and I left London and we settled in West Sussex. And I found myself kind of like knee deep in motherhood. And then we came to Dubai. And I still, at that point, I had no ambition of kind of having my own business. I always thought it was very stressful and a lot of unknown and insecurities. And I don't like the unknown, or I thought I didn't like the unknown in my life. But I think spending, and we were chatting about this offline, I think I spent a first year in Dubai meeting people, meeting mums in the playground, meeting their husbands, meeting people in different events. And you can't help but be inspired by the underlining entrepreneurial spirit of Dubai, that people who come here, they have ambition. And I think what came to me after about a year being here, that whatever ambition I have, I should just try. That there's very little fear of failure here. That even if you fail, it's not seen as a failure. It's encouraged. Like attempting to do something, you know, it's you trying. If you launch a business and it doesn't succeed, you go for it. And I think, so the one thing that nobody maybe warned me in my particular case, what happens when the business is successful and it grows much faster than you've anticipated? That was my biggest challenge. You know, my husband has been a business owner for the last 30 years. So I've always lived, you know, for a long time, we've been together 13 years. I've lived with somebody. So I've seen what it looks like firsthand when you have challenges in the business, what it looks like to run a big team. He's got global offices in 4 different countries. So I've seen that. That didn't scare me. What scared me as I was entering my drink dry journey, that things started happening much, much faster. And we picked up momentum much, much faster. And I had to hire people much faster. I had to, you know, this is what surprised me. And nobody and nothing prepared me. Because if I look at my husband's journey, it took him probably 10 to 15 years to get the business out of that, making £10,000, losing £10,000, like out of that first phase of the business. You know, he had a great lifestyle out of it, but it was just kind of like difficult all the time. Whereas with my business, within 5 years, you know, I've got a team of 18 people. We're market leaders. We're profitable. We have a private family office based in the IFC who invested in us in 2020-22. So again, like I took a load of somebody else's money to build the business. There comes a certain challenge and pressure with that. So I had a very different entrepreneurial journey. And I think that was my biggest challenge, that I had to write the rules as I went, and I had to really make it up every day as I went along.
That's a good position to be in, actually. It's a good problem, as they say. So many founders say that at some point your business outgrows the systems that you built early on. What was the first thing that you had to unlearn as Drink Dry started to grow? Unlearn.
I've had some really great mentors in my journey, and I credit that. My first mentor was Tyrone Reed, who was then the CEO of Alabar Enterprises. He now is CEO of Emirates Leisure Group and MMI. So kind of like hospitality, drinks background. And so he was phenomenal in asking me all the right questions in our mentoring sessions to help me put things in place very, very early on and invest in systems, invest in ERP systems very, very early on. And again, and so did my husband, you know, kind of sharing with me the lessons that he learned. So I would actually say, I don't know if there was anything that we outgrew as a business, because we put in and such a great sophisticated ERP system so early on. I would say the end of 2021, we invested a load of money into a great ERP system to set us up. So by the time we saw this exponential growth, we were fine. We had the reports, we had the numbers, we knew our landed cost, we could really see the business, like every little bit and every little detail of it. And, you know, people like my husband, and I do refer to him as my mentor a lot, because he would say to me, know your business inside out. Nobody should quote you out that you don't know your landed price, like the absolute core of your business. And I think when you grow really, really fast, sometimes you lose track of those foundations. I feel like we didn't do that at Drink Dry. You know, we've invested into a great CRM system when we only had 2 salespeople. I mean, did we really have to have a CRM system? Not really, but we did. We invested in really great project management system internally, because we have different teams and different departments. And before we got to the point where we saw that the teams weren't communicating between them, we put Asana in place, you know, so people can use it and see what other supply chain can see what marketing are doing. And that really advises them on forecasting. Supply chain can see the sales pipeline. They just have to open and they see what's the pipeline. And obviously they have a meeting with the sales team and say, you know, how strong is this? Like, how confident are we in that? But we can see that. Again, so we were always, I would say, investing ahead of time. So by the time we grew, and by the time you'd normally stand and go, oh, shoot, we really need an ERP system. We really need something. We had it. And we'd had it set up. And I think for us, that's where having our private family office who invested in us, having that support from the back office was really, really helpful because, you know, I would think, I need a system that does that.
Yeah.
And I would go to them and say, can I please have somebody from your team who can help me in setting it up, who can attend the meetings with me to ask the right questions of 5 different companies who are selling the same product.
Yeah.
So having that backing, not just from financial support, but having the know-how and having people who are senior, who are smart people to be in your corner and ask the questions for you. So you come across a lot more legit as a company.
Correct.
Was really, really, really critical. And I would say, I see, and I get that validation from whenever we hire new people. So we've just had somebody join us 3 weeks ago who came in as a head of sales, and he comes in a really senior position from fantastic background, who worked for big companies, big breweries, small craft breweries, the exact kind of profile that we were looking for. And, you know, and it's always a bit of a fear when somebody comes in. You think, oh, we're doing everything so great. We're amazing. We're so fantastic. And then somebody else comes in and you have to be open to their view and how they view your business and what are the gaps in your business. And there's always some improvement that we can make. There's always some processes we can put in place. But the general validation we get when people join us is, this is actually great. Yeah, there's definitely improvements to be made. Absolute car crash over here. But, you know, you get that validation of we have the tools to make it better, which I think has been really important.
Nice, very nice. So when you look at other women-led businesses here or globally, what traits do you think set the most successful ones apart?
Wow, great question. The first one, whenever I get questions, similar questions to this asked, the first person that comes to mind is Natasha, the owner of Tishtash PR and Communications. I would credit so much of my success to her from very early days. You know, I started Drink Dry in 2020. It was kind of 2020 was the year when we got our ducks in a row. You know, we got all the compliance done. We put all the things in place. And 2021 was the first year of growth. I've hired my first 2 or 3 people, and September 2021 was when we hired Tishtash. It was my single biggest business expense I had. I wasn't paying myself a salary. So paying the salaries and Tishtash was the biggest expense. We were all based out of the back of my house somewhere. So we didn't have an office expense. And she is such an example of a woman in business who lifts other women up. Truly, I mean, some of the most commercially viable partnerships for Drink Dry came from Natasha making introductions just because she could. It came from Natasha inviting me to events, to some intimate gatherings that wasn't just, you know, something that's already out on Instagram, come to this amazing event, but her inviting me to carefully curated group of women that were supporting each other. And I credit a lot of that. And I think when I look at people who are successful, and particularly women in business, it's actually those who support each other. You know, I'm sure she supports a lot of male businesses too because she has male clients. But she just has such a unique way of connecting women in business and making sure that you benefit, not just from maybe connecting and supporting each other mentally, emotionally, mentoring, but commercially, that you actually are helping each other's business. And I think for me, that's what sets women found and led businesses apart, when you are able to collaborate. And I think I've always knew the word collaborate as just part of my vocabulary, but not until I started Drink Dry and I kind of fell into that ecosystem of incredible women who were either running their own businesses or they were running other people's businesses, but they were kind of the face and they're almost like a founder of that business, that have really understood what collaboration and partnership means.
Thank you for that. So just moving on now, a little bit of almost like a quick fire round. What's one thing you miss about your early startup days?
The unknown, the exact thing that used to scare me the most. I love not knowing, and I love having problems that solutions were yet to be found.
Thank you. And what's the biggest misconception people have about being your own boss?
that you get to clock out whenever you want. I don't think I've ever in my entire life worked longer hours and harder than I did in the first 3 years of starting Drink Dry. I knew nothing about the business I was falling into. I had no idea what margin is. I genuinely, kid you not, I asked my husband a question, what is margin, when I already had about 50,000 euros worth of stock in the warehouse. And the guy just kind of like put his hands in his head and he went, oh my gosh, like where do we begin? But yeah.
Nice. Is there a book, podcast or piece of advice that really shaped your approach to leadership?
Yes. There is a podcast with Karen Brady, the lady who kind of Lord Sugar, as she was on his apprentice program. And I think it's Stephen Bartlett's podcast with Diary of a CEO, good few years back. But I listened to that podcast, I would say every couple of months, just to remind myself. And there's a particular moment where she talks about the difference between management and leadership. And that really hit home for me. And I think it came out probably 3 years ago at the time where I was starting to hire senior people or promote people into senior positions. And I had to really understand the difference between management and leadership. And she talks about how management is, setting out budgets and hitting those budgets, managing P&L, managing targets, managing people. It's basically the deliverables of the business and the metrics of business being successful. Yeah. And you report to the board and you have kind of your KPIs to hit, and it's all about the management of the business. The leadership, it's having a vision of your business that nobody else can see and convincing everybody on your team to come along for the ride, to paint that vision for everybody so clearly that even if they can't see it, they know that you see it so clearly, and you convince everybody that this is where we're going, and taking the whole team blindly with you. And that just stuck with me ever since I heard that.
Thanks for sharing. So we're moving on to a little bit about personal investment, financial mindset. So looking back, was there a financial decision that you made early on that you're especially proud of?
In terms of Drink Dry or just in general?
Could be general as well. Anything?
I think Drink Dry, I would say, is one of my most lucrative investments that I've made. And founders have there are different types of founders. Some people, without even proving the concept, they go out and look for investment, and they're prepared to dilute, to have very small minority of their own business, but they're not prepared to put their own skin in the game. I didn't want to do that, and I remember, and I'm happy to disclose this. And I remember when I sat down with my husband in 2019, we kind of said, well, how much are we prepared because it was coming from our own personal, how much are we prepared to invest into this business that if we lose it all, we're okay with it. Yeah. And we both agreed that we'll put around 200 to 250,000 dirhams to get the first round of stock and see what happens out of that. Yeah. In the first year and a half, I invested 2.2 million dirhams of our own finances. I mean, I drained our personal savings. I put everything that we had in liquid cash into this business. But I proved the concept. I had success. Our revenue in the first year was over 3 million dirhams in just less than 12 months with 3 people. And we were profitable. So I proved the business concept, and I proved that if we had enough funding, we could scale and grow this beyond anybody's imagination. Yeah. And at that point, which is a completely different story, but this private family office approached us, and I had the confidence. I initially very gently rejected their offer to invest because I felt it was too early. Yeah. But I had the proof of concept to say, well, actually, let's look into this. If you put in this much money and I put a bit more, we can grow this much, much faster. So, I continue to invest into my business, and if I look at the valuation of the business, it's my most lucrative investment I've made to date. And it was a great lesson for me to learn that if I had a choice of a pot of money that I have, and if I had a business idea, I would bet on myself above everything else. I would always back myself
Love that.
against everything else, And I think on just like the personal investments, we've always invested in property. In Dubai, there's a lot of opportunity with off-plan. So my husband and I recently, we bought 2 properties, off-plan properties in Ras Al Khaimah that we believe is going to be great return. We've invested in properties. We lived here and always made a great return. I purely out of, I think, I don't want to say philanthropy, but out of understanding what it's like having an idea and not having access to funding, because I did. And I can only imagine how difficult it would be to have an idea that you believe so strongly in that like your whole inside is just burning to do it and not having the money to start. I do invest in a lot of startup businesses from almost angel investor perspective. And, some of them have paid some dividend, some of them haven't. And we haven't managed to scale out of that cottage industry, providing one person. We've just, however much we invested, we've not managed to grow it. But I'm okay with that. I think we make, as people, we make enough money, a bit there, a bit there.
Yeah.
And then we lose a bit here. But as long as your overall, and this is what investments for me is all about, as long as your overall investment portfolio, whether that's in startups, businesses, stock markets, which we don't really do that much, or anything else that you do, overall is making you a return, it's okay. And if you feel good about doing some investments, that's even better, because where I'm not a shrewd financier that goes, well, that looks like a terrible investment. I won't get my money back in the next 20 years. But if I help the economy, if I do good for my community, if it's an impact-led business that will affect 500 families in the next 2 years and it will do good for my community, I will invest happily.
Nice, I love that. So many young women feel that they need perfect savings or funding before they start a business. What would you tell your younger self and about financial readiness and to taking that leap?
I might have an unpopular opinion here, and I'm okay with that. I don't. It depends. Look, if you are young, you are independent, you don't have dependents on you, so you don't have children, you don't have a mortgage. If you don't have financial commitments, then you're in a really blessed setting, right? This is the time where you go, do you know what? If it doesn't happen, the only thing that I'm kind of losing out on is my lifestyle, right? So if you have a really great job that provides you with a great lifestyle, but you have this business idea that you want to start, go for it, because you'll recover from that. You'll just get another job if something doesn't work out. But if it works out, you are creating a lifetime of enjoyment, satisfaction, happiness. You're writing your own story. Yeah. Now, the unpopular opinion comes in when I think you have financial commitments and if you have things that depend on you, I think you have to weigh up really carefully, because it isn't just you anymore. It is your spouse. I can only imagine how difficult it was for my husband to continue backing me for the first 2 years and letting me drain our families. I mean, our lifestyle didn't suffer from that, but we put everything we had in liquid assets to let me do that. And there were some challenges in that, like personal challenges where things would go wrong or I'd make a mistake. It's really difficult for somebody else who's next to you to say, well, I told you so. Well, that was a bad move. That was a silly move. So I think you have to weigh that up, and don't leave your day job. Don't be prepared to sacrifice your weekends. Be prepared to put in some extra hours in the evening to start it as a side hustle.
True.
This is my always advice, where don't leave something that provides you with stability. It provides you with a good lifestyle. Try it out as a side hustle first, sacrifice the social life first before you start sacrificing everything else that is the core of your own personal life.
That's great advice. So running a growing business and managing personal finances often collide. How do you personally draw the line between reinvesting in your business and building your own financial security?
I mean, incredible question. And there's no easy answer, I think. I would say for sure. So my investment with my investors was really great, and it was cash in and cash out. So I sold the shares, so I got the money back that I invested initially. And then I had a decision to make in 2023 when we were really investing, and we were investing in hiring people that we at that point didn't need. But I knew that I need them to be fully bedded into the business 6 to 12 months later if we were going to go after global brands and we wanted to position ourselves as market leaders. Now, that's a risky move because you could invest in all of that and you don't get any of the global brands when you're pitching for them. And then you've got all these people just costing you a load of money. And yes, they're fantastic, they're great, but you don't have the business, you don't have the brands for them to work with and really get stuck in. So I think 2023, that's where it was a lot of just guts. It took a lot of guts. And I would say that was still for me and my investors was a high risk investment where we said, do you know what? We're going to go for it.
Yeah.
We could have gone for a lot more organic growth, but I'm not sure looking back if we would have been able to just get the brands that we now have and represent because we wouldn't have had the team to convince them to trust us to do that. So that was a really risky move. And I would say that's where you're investing in, a really high risk off-plan property where you go, this could go either of the two ways. But we made that decision and it's paid off and paid dividends. If I look at the investments we made this year, again, to continue running the business and continue funding us, that was a really easy decision because all the business metrics, if I step aside and I look at it as a business, would I as an investor invest into it? 100%, 100 million%. We are showing all the healthy metrics for a growing business. So that wasn't a difficult decision to make. And by that point, you know that you are simply investing in growth. So you're not covering the losses. You're funding the growth of the business for all the right reasons. And I think, I would struggle to probably take the money away from my personal life if it hugely compromised not my life. I don't mind about my lifestyle, but if it compromised the lifestyle of my children, my husband, I think that would make it very, very difficult to do. So it always has to be the balance of let's protect that first and make sure that this is okay and then make a decision, how much am I prepared to invest into my business? And that always dictates how fast we can grow. Maybe if we invested a little bit more last year, we could have grown a bit faster. But it's okay. We built a really solid foundation. We built a profitable business. We embedded all the right people. It's okay. We did all the right things. But had I invested a bit more, maybe we would have grown a bit faster. But I'm okay with the decision we made.
Thank you. If you could invest in one asset outside of your business in 2025, we've kind of covered some of this, but whether that's property, wellness, education, or something else, what would it be and why?
I think two things, and I'm yet to decide which is takes priority. I think any business that is currently in longevity has a lot of legs for me. I would definitely invest in that, whether that's new tech that's coming out. COVID has really opened our eyes into what life is and that we get one shot at it and what our health is. So anything that focuses on human life and longevity, I would definitely invest in. And I think secondly, food security has got to be. I mean, I'm an optimist in life. I always see not just half full, but like it's full, it's brimming, like it's full to the brim,
Yeah.
But I think when I look at water scarcity and food security, this is something that I'm really passionate about. So there's a fantastic business that came into the region, my goodness, I think back in 2019. And one of the co-founders was a Lithuanian guy. So I've always followed their journey called Pure Harvest. And they put in like these smart warehouses somewhere in the desert and they grow tomatoes and they sell it in local supermarkets. So anything that would provide us with food security in this region and water scarcity and avoid that, I would definitely invest in that.
That's great. So that brings us to the end of this particular series. Thank you so much, Erika. I've learned a lot, and I think a lot of our viewers and listeners are going to pick up so many amazing tips, and it was so interesting to hear your story as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.